Veteran John Marlowe stood under the cold winter sky of Flagstaff, Arizona, his breath misting as Ranger pressed against his leg, feeling the weight of his master. John's last $50 was folded in his pocket, and the foreclosure notice taped to his trailer door counted down the final days. At the yard, the auctioneer yanked open the door of Unit 32. A wall of black trash bags collapsed forward, reeking of acrid odor. The crowd laughed, the professionals turned away, but as the auctioneer walked away, John froze. Deep in the darkness, Ranger saw something, a faint gleam of luxury leather hidden beneath the plastic. John raised his hand. Why would a poor veteran gamble at all on a unit full of trash? And what truth was hidden by the missing woman waiting inside those bags? Support us by subscribing to our channel. Winter winds scraped across the asphalt like broken glass, carrying the cold bite of Flagstaff's high desert air. John Marlowe pulled his worn dark brown leather jacket tighter around his ribs as he walked toward the storage yard entrance. Ranger's steady footfalls beside him matching his own. The German Shepherd, 7 years old with a black saddle, copper-toned legs, and a gray-dusted muzzle, moved with the quiet confidence of a seasoned companion who had learned to read every shift in his master's breathing. John, 55 and carved by years that never softened, wore medium-length brown hair streaked in gray and a thick salt-and-pepper beard that framed a face weathered by loss, long nights, and memories that refused to stay buried. His old brown shoes scraped the concrete, and beneath the jacket his red-white-black plaid shirt and dark gray undershirt did little against the freezing morning cold. He kept his eyes low while weaving through the gathering bidders, flippers, resellers, wanderers looking for luck in other people's abandoned lives. He never liked auctions. Too many voices, too many glances that assessed him, like another item up for sale. People saw the rough exterior, the quiet stare, and assumed he was less than he used to be. In truth, he simply spoke less because he no longer believed words fixed anything. Ranger nudged his leg gently, sensing the weight in John's thoughts. Frank, the auctioneer, a tall, wiry man in his 60s with thinning white hair and a cracked leather vest, lifted his megaphone. His voice cut through the cold air. Unit 32 up first. The bidders flowed toward the row of units. Among them was Sarah Finwick, a tall, slender woman in her early 40s, with pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and blonde hair pulled so tightly into a bun it looked painful. She walked like someone who had never been denied anything, and would bite the world before letting it take from her. Her assistant, Tracy, a petite brunette in a black puffer vest, followed silently, tapping notes on her tablet with nervous fingers. Sarah's lips curled into a knowing smirk when she saw John. "Another crowd of dreamers," she murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. John ignored her. Ranger didn't. He let out a low rumble of annoyance. Frank tugged the metal latch. The storage door rattled upward with a harsh metallic shriek. A wall of black trash bags slumped forward like a bloated, lifeless creature. A cloud of stale air drifted out, old fabric, dust, and something faintly sour, eliciting groans and laughter from the crowd. "Who stores their whole life in garbage?" someone snorted. "Looks like they forgot to take out the trash before moving," Sarah said with a sharp grin. John felt a slow burn rise under his collar, not shame, but irritation at how easily people mocked what they didn't understand. Behind every storage unit was someone who'd lost something, a job, a marriage, a lifetime. These bags weren't a joke to him. They were a story no one had read yet. Ranger's posture changed. The shepherd stood perfectly still, ears forward, tail stiff, eyes locked on the back of the unit, as if seeing something no one else could. John tightened his grip on the leash, feeling the faint pull toward the darkness. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Ranger didn't blink. Frank raised his voice cheerfully. "You all see what you see. Garbage bags. Minimum bid, $25. Silence spread among the crowd. No hands, no interest. Ranger's ears twitched. "All right then. Going once, going twice." John raised his hand. Every head turned. Sarah laughed sharply. "Oh, you've got to be kidding." He didn't respond. Frank blinked in mild surprise. 25 from bidder 14. "Do I hear 30? Silence. Ranger leaned forward, muscles taut. John swallowed. 30. Frank nodded. 30 going once, going twice. Sold. The murmurs rose, mocking, pitying, dismissive, but John barely heard them. Ranger was already pulling him toward the mouth of Unit 32, nose low, body tense in a way that made John's heart thud with something unfamiliar. He stepped inside. The bags towered around him like silent witnesses. Dust shifted beneath his boots. He reached for the nearest torn bag and froze. Beneath the crinkling plastic shone the corner of polished leather, too clean, too smooth, too expensive to belong here. Ranger nudged it, whining softly. John crouched and touched the edge of the knot. His knife slid through the plastic. The bag began to open. And from deep within the unit, he saw something that made his breath stall. The faint outline of a handprint pressed from inside another bag. And the plastic moved. John kept one hand on Ranger's collar as the black plastic seemed to tremble again. But when he pressed the back of his knuckles against it, the movement stopped, revealing only the stale crunch of shifting fabric inside. Not an animal, not a person, just weight redistributing from years of being packed tightly. His pulse began to steady as he set the knife against the knot and pulled. The plastic split open with a soft, tearing sound, releasing a puff of dust that glimmered in the cold light. What spilled out was impossible. A silk evening dress, rich emerald green, cut elegantly, the kind worn by women who attended fundraisers rather than grocery stores. The fabric was unwrinkled despite years in storage. Beneath it lay 2 Italian leather handbags, caramel brown with delicate stitching, unmistakably high-end. A pair of ivory heels sat wrapped in tissue paper, untouched, their soles pristine. John stared, breath caught halfway in his chest. Ranger sniffed the items intently, tail still and alert, as though this wasn't what he had scented earlier. Another bag came apart under John's knife, and more clothing, designer coats, tailored skirts, delicate blouses lined with lace, slid out like a wardrobe belonging to someone who lived a very different life. He touched a blazer sleeve, surprised by its soft weight. These weren't thrift store finds. Someone had cared for these pieces meticulously. A crunch of gravel behind him made him turn. Sarah Finwick, the tall, lean woman with pale skin, sharp cheekbones, and a bun so tight it never seemed to move, stood a few feet away. Her arms were crossed, her tan coat draped perfectly across her shoulders. Her assistant, Tracy, hovered behind her, small, slight, with straight brown hair tucked under a knitted beanie, clutching her tablet like a shield. "Well," Sarah said, eyebrow arching, "looks like your trash bags aren't trash after all." Her voice carried arrogance, but John sensed something else beneath it, calculation. Sarah wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. She was a hunter who hated missing prey. "Move along," John muttered. Sarah's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Relax, I'm not going to steal your precious dresses, though I'll admit I'm impressed. Someone of your situation usually ends up with old tools or moldy furniture." Her gaze flicked to Ranger. "Your dog has a better eye than most people." Ranger let out a short, irritated huff. Sarah stepped closer, but John shifted his body, blocking her line of sight into the rest of the unit. She clicked her tongue and stepped back with a shrug. "Suit yourself, soldier. Just don't say I didn't congratulate you first." She turned on her heel, Tracy scurrying after her. John waited until they were gone before dragging out another bag. Ranger moved to the far corner, nose low, tail stiff, pulling toward the deepest part of the unit. "What do you smell, boy?" John whispered. He sliced the next bag open. Photographs spilled out, hundreds of them, loose, glossy, curled at the edges. They showed a woman in her 40s, slender, tall, with wavy dark brown hair and light hazel eyes. She had a poised, warm smile and a confidence that radiated from every frame. She appeared at charity galas, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, museum events, always well-dressed, always surrounded by donors, mayors, and community leaders. John lifted a photo and read the embossed name on a backdrop, Hart Foundation for Arts and Families. Then he found her name scribbled in looping cursive on the back of a portrait, Eliza Hart. Before he could process that, Ranger began scratching lightly at another bag, whining. John knelt, slicing it quickly. Inside lay folders, newspaper clippings, documents, letters. And sitting at the top was a laminated missing person flyer. Missing. Eliza Hart. Age 43. Missing since 3 years ago. Last seen leaving a charity gala in downtown Phoenix. Ongoing investigation. John's stomach tightened as he stared at the woman's smiling photograph printed on the flyer, the same face in the photos around his knees. Ranger pressed against him, sensing the shift in his breathing. John looked him down at the long corridor of the darkness-filled unit, the black bags still looming like silent witnesses. This wasn't trash. This was a life, a vanished life, stuffed into garbage bags and left to rot. Someone had wanted these things hidden. Someone had paid for silence. And now, by accident or fate, Ranger had led John straight to the center of a story that wasn't finished. He lifted the missing flyer again, a tremor forming in his hand. If Eliza Hart had vanished 3 years ago, who put her things here? And why was Ranger now growling softly at the deepest uncut bags, as if something inside them still waited to be found? The air inside Unit 32 grew heavier as John dug deeper into the farthest corner, the place Ranger had been fixated on since the first moment the door rolled open. Dust floated like pale ghosts in the cold light, settling over the last unopened bag stacked neatly against the concrete wall. John gripped the thickest one, feeling its unusual weight, and dragged it out. Ranger circled it once, ears high, tail rigid, not fearful but alert, as if recognizing an old scent he didn't trust. John steadied the bag between his boots, cut through the plastic, and peeled it back. Nestled inside, wrapped in layers of faded blankets and a sheet of protective foam, was a small steel safe. Matte black, no logo, no manufacturer's stamp, no serial number etched into the surface. It looked new, untouched, but there was a strange stillness around it, an unnatural cold that seemed to rise from the metal itself. On the lid, written in elegant cursive with a silver paint pen, were the words, "If I disappear, the truth is in here." John felt a quiet chill slide into his chest. Eliza Hart's handwriting from the photos, smooth, looping, unmistakable, was the same as the message on the safe. He touched the letters gently, as if afraid the ink would smear, but they remained solid, deliberate, like a final plea from someone who knew they were running out of time. Ranger sniffed the safe with a short, sharp whine. His fur lifted along his spine. "Easy, boy," John murmured, though his own voice was tight. "We're just looking." But just as his fingers curled beneath the safe's edge to lift it, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A single vibration, no caller ID. John frowned and answered cautiously. "Hello?" A man's voice cut through the line, cold, controlled, edged with the kind of authority that belonged to someone who had spent years commanding others. "Don't open it," John froze. "You don't understand what you've involved yourself in," the voice continued, low and razor sharp. "Walk away while you can." The tone was wrong, too steady, too rehearsed. John had heard voices like this during his service. Men who operated in the dark, men who gave orders without explaining why, men who expected obedience. His muscles tightened. "Who is this?" John asked. Silence, then a soft click. Before John could process it, Ranger erupted in a furious bark, twisting toward the entrance of the storage row. The shepherd's bark wasn't random. It was the same deep, guttural alarm he used when sensing danger, the same sound he made years ago in Afghanistan, right before a hidden figure stepped from behind a clay wall with bad intentions. Ranger lunged toward the open unit, hackles raised. John followed his line of sight and saw movement at the far end of the storage lane, a lone man slipping behind one of the larger units. The man was tall with a broader build, wearing a dark jacket and a black baseball cap pulled low over his face. Even from a distance, there was something deliberate about his movements, like someone trained not to be seen yet choosing to watch anyway. John's breath tightened. He had seen that man earlier, when the auction began. A figure leaning against a truck, face hidden beneath the brim of a cap, eyes locked on Unit 32 long before anyone knew what was inside. At the time, John assumed he was another bidder. Now he wasn't so sure. Ranger barked again, body trembling with restrained aggression. John raised his voice. "Hey! You there!" The man did not turn. He ducked behind the corner and vanished, as if he'd rehearsed the exit. John jogged a few steps toward the lane, but stopped when he heard tires crunching gravel. Someone leaving quickly, too quickly, the sound fading into the winter wind. By the time he reached the edge of the row, the truck was gone. He stood there for a long moment, the freezing air cutting across his cheeks. His pulse thudded in a slow, heavy rhythm. Ranger pressed his side against John's leg, grounding him. When they returned to Unit 32, the safe still sat on the ground where he left it, small, silent, and humming with unspoken danger. John crouched beside it again. His hands hovered inches above the cold metal. Someone didn't want it opened, someone powerful enough to track him within minutes of touching it. But then he saw Eliza's handwriting again. "If I disappear, the truth is in here." He exhaled slowly. Ranger whined softly, torn between warning and curiosity. John placed both hands on the safe. He didn't open it, not yet. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever was inside was the reason Eliza Hart vanished, and the reason a stranger was watching from the shadows. The winter wind outside moaned through the gaps between units, carrying a quiet message that settled in John's bones. This was no longer just about a storage unit, and someone wasn't going to let him walk away alive with what he'd found. The winter sun hung low over Flagstaff as John and Ranger stepped into the quiet neighborhood that once belonged to Eliza Hart. Her house stood at the end of a pine-lined street, once elegant but now abandoned, its windows dulled by dust and the yard overtaken by brittle grass. Ranger paused at the gate, stiff and focused, the kind of stance he used when he recognized a scent worth trusting. John followed him through the creaking gate and across the frozen lawn, watching as Ranger traced invisible paths beneath the frost until he began digging hard near a dead hydrangea bush. Beneath the churned dirt lay a spent bullet casing, weathered by time, and beside it, a broken police badge snapped clean down the middle. John turned the jagged metal in his glove, and a cold dread crept through him. Someone had struggled here. Someone had been hurt. Ranger's sudden bark shattered the silence, and he sprinted toward the back of the house, nails scratching against the wooden porch. John followed, heart pounding, until they reached the collapsed shed where the boards leaned like broken ribs. Ranger sniffed with urgency, weaving through the tangled debris before digging again at a patch of loose earth. Together they unearthed a wooden plank, then the outline of a tunnel entrance, collapsed long ago and sealed by force. John lowered himself inside, flashlight in hand, feeling the heavy air press around him like a warning. The beam revealed scattered debris, rusted metal, and then 3 crushed suitcases and a dust-coated metal box. He dragged the box toward the light and opened it to find SD cards, documents, and a leather-bound journal marked EH. The journal's first pages trembled in John's hands. Eliza's handwriting filled them, fearful, rushed, pleading. She wrote of a police officer named Gregory Shaw, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw, thinning black hair, and cold gray eyes that warned others not to cross him. In public, he was charming and polished. In private, volatile and controlling. He had coerced her into falsifying charity finances and threatened her when she resisted. When she prepared to expose him, he became violent. Her entries grew frantic, letters slashing across the page as she described hiding evidence inside this very tunnel. The final lines were desperate. "If anything happens to me, it was him. Everything you need is here. Don't let him bury the truth." Ranger barked above the tunnel, urging John to come back. He climbed out slowly, the journal clutched tightly in his hands. The cold air hit him like a new truth settling in his lungs. Everything he had found, Unit 32, the safe, the anonymous call, the stalker in the shadows, led here. Eliza hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been hunting for justice, hiding from a predator wearing a badge, and when she got too close to exposing the truth, someone made sure she didn't escape. John stood in the brittle backyard, Ranger pressed against his leg, and felt the weight of her story settle into his bones. The fight she'd started was now in his hands, and whoever had silenced her wasn't finished yet. The morning light over Flagstaff was thin and pale, the kind that made the frost glitter like powdered glass across the streets as John Marlowe walked toward the sheriff's office with the leather-bound journal tucked tightly under his arm. His worn brown leather jacket creaked with every step, and Ranger padded beside him, head high, tail steady, fur bristling with a quiet alertness that said the dog understood the weight of what they carried. John pushed the glass door open, and warm air washed over his cold skin. Inside, the station buzzed with the usual movement of deputies and clerks, but one man immediately caught his eye. Deputy Marcus Hale, a broad-shouldered officer in his mid-30s, with sandy blonde hair cut close, a square jaw dusted with stubble, and eyes that shifted between empathy and suspicion whenever trouble walked in. Hale had a reputation for fairness, shaped by losing his older brother, also a deputy, to corruption years ago. It made him cautious, meticulous, unwilling to let rot grow inside the department. "Can I help you?" Hale asked, his voice steady. John placed the journal, SD cards, and documents carefully on the counter. "It's about Eliza Hart." The entire room seemed to pause. Hale lifted the journal gently, scanning the first few lines, and a shadow crossed his expression. He motioned for John to follow him into a small conference room with fogged glass panels. Ranger curled at John's feet as Hale examined the evidence piece by piece. When Hale reached the video files, records showing forced signatures, threats, financial manipulations, his jaw tightened. "Do you know this man?" Hale asked, tapping a still frame where an officer appeared beside Eliza. Broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a stern mouth and a gaze full of authority. John leaned closer. "That's the one from the photos at her gala, the one who kept showing up in the background." Hale nodded grimly. "Officer Travis Cole, decorated, praised for leading the search for Eliza 3 years ago." His voice sank. If this is real, he was never searching for her. He was making sure no one else ever did. John's pulse thudded. Ranger lifted his head, sensing his master's rising tension. Hale stood abruptly. "We're opening this case right now. I'll bring this to the sheriff." He hesitated for a moment, his expression softening. "You may have just cracked something people have been afraid to touch." John left the station feeling a weight shift, just slightly, as though someone else finally carried a piece of the burden. But as he stepped onto the sidewalk, Ranger growled low. John followed the dog's gaze. At the end of the street, the man in the black baseball cap stepped out from behind a parked SUV. The same man who had watched them at the storage yard. The same shadow who fled when Ranger barked. He strode toward them with sharp, purposeful steps. Rugged, mid-40s, unshaven jaw, scar slicing across his cheek. Someone used to violence, someone shaped by it. Before John could react, the man lunged, blocking the sidewalk. "You should have stayed out of it," he snarled, reaching for John's jacket. Ranger launched forward like lightning, teeth bared, slamming the man backward. The attacker stumbled, swinging wildly, but Ranger pinned him with a ferocity John hadn't seen since their deployments overseas. John pulled Ranger back just as a squad car rounded the corner, sirens cutting sharply through the cold morning. Deputy Hale leapt out, weapon drawn. "Hands where I can see them!" The man froze, and in that moment, something in his eyes collapsed. Fear, resignation, recognition that his leash to Travis Cole had just snapped. Hale cuffed him quickly, shoving him into the back of the cruiser. "He's Cole's enforcer," Hale muttered. "We've been looking for him for months." News spread fast. By that afternoon, an arrest warrant for Travis Cole was issued statewide. The officer, once considered a hero, vanished the moment his crimes surfaced. For 2 tense days, every news station replayed his photo. On the third night, he was caught trying to cross into New Mexico, his once perfect composure shattered in the mugshot released by authorities. With Cole in custody and the evidence undeniable, the case of Eliza Hart reopened, not as a disappearance, but as an attempted murder. 7 days later, the call came. John arrived at a small community clinic 2 towns south of the border, where Hale waited. Inside a softly lit room sat a woman, thin, pale, her wavy dark hair tied loosely, hazel eyes rimmed red from tears. When she looked up, John's breath caught. The photographs hadn't lied. Eliza Hart was alive. She had lived in hiding, moving from town to town, terrified that Cole, or his men, would find her. When Hale told her the truth, was finally safe, she had collapsed trembling into her hands. Now she rose slowly and reached for John. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was unwavering. "You and your dog, you saved my life," she whispered. John swallowed the knot in his throat. Ranger nudged her gently, tail wagging in soft circles. In the days that followed, Eliza reclaimed the charitable funds Cole had stolen, clearing her foundation's name. As a thank you, she gifted John a generous share, enough to pay his debts, repair his weathered home, and begin a small assistance program for struggling veterans in northern Arizona. She insisted he keep everything inside Unit 32 as well, the designer clothing, the bags, the valuables. "They were never trash," she said softly. "They were the pieces of me he couldn't destroy." A week later, snow drifted gently across John's freshly repaired porch. Ranger lay stretched at his feet, belly full, resting on a new memory foam bed purchased with Eliza's gift. John watched the snowfall settle on the pines, a rare warmth spreading through his chest. "Funny," he murmured, scratching Ranger's ear. "Sometimes black trash bags hide miracles." Ranger tilted his head as if agreeing, his amber eyes glowing in the soft winter light. There are moments in life when everything feels heavy, when the road ahead seems too dark to trust, and when even hope feels like something only other people get to keep. But sometimes, in the quiet places we don't expect, grace finds its way back to us. John thought he had lost everything, yet through a pile of forgotten black bags, he found a truth that saved a life, and a life that brought him back to his own. Some call it luck, some call it timing, but Many of us know that when the right doors open and the right people cross our path at just the right moment, that's not an accident at all. That's the gentle hand of God reminding us we're not alone, even when the world feels cold. As you finish this story, may you remember that miracles don't always arrive wrapped in gold. Sometimes they're hidden in the places we overlook, waiting for someone brave enough to open the first bag, take the first step, or whisper the first prayer. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need their own reminder that God is still working, even in the shadows. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what miracles you've seen in your own life. And if you'd like more stories of courage, loyalty, and the quiet ways faith shows up, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you and keep you wherever you are tonight.